There's a woman who has been freelancing for 8 years, has more referrals than she can handle, and made $87,000 last year. By her own estimate, she left $35,000 on the table, not because clients pushed back on her rates, but because she never raised them. She has revised her rate sheet 4 times in 8 years. Each revision landed below what she originally typed before she talked herself back down to something that felt safer to say out loud. Her clients have never once complained about her pricing. Several have told her directly that she undercharges. She smiled and said she'd think about it. She is not unusual. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that women leave an average of $7,000 on the table in their first salary negotiation alone, not across a career, in a single conversation. And because every raise, every bonus, every retirement contribution for the next 30 years gets calculated as a percentage of that starting number, that one moment, or the absence of it, compounds into something most women have never sat down and calculated. Linda Babcock at Carnegie Mellon did the calculation. The lifetime earnings cost of not negotiating a starting salary, when you account for the compounding effect on every subsequent raise and retirement contribution built on that lower base, exceeds $1 million. Not from bad investments, not from overspending, from a number that came out smaller than the one she had already done the math on. The conventional explanation for this is confidence. Women are less confident, less comfortable with self-advocacy, more conflict-averse. That explanation has been circulating for 20 years, and the gender pay gap has moved by approximately 2 cents over the same period. Confidence is not the variable. The actual variable is something researchers have been documenting since the 1990s that almost nobody explains in plain terms to the women it is actively affecting. Lori Rudman at Rutgers University ran a series of controlled studies on what actually happens when women negotiate assertively for higher compensation. Women who used identical language to male counterparts, same ask, same framing, same data, were rated as less likable, less hireable, and socially presumptuous. The men using the exact same words were rated as competent and confident. The bias wasn't in the women, it was consistent across evaluators of both genders. A woman negotiating assertively triggers a social penalty that a man performing the identical behavior does not trigger. That is not a perception problem the woman needs to work on. That is a documented, replicable finding about how financial ambition is received differently depending on who is expressing it. The room responds differently. The room has always responded differently. And every woman in that room has felt it, even the ones who couldn't name it. The brain doesn't need to be told this explicitly to learn it. It observes what happens to women who ask for too much, in the workplace, in her family, in every environment she has moved through since she was old enough to watch how adults talked about money, and it encodes a prediction. For you, visible financial ambition has a social cost. Then it starts charging you that cost before anyone else does. The guilt that appears right before you say a number out loud, the internal correction that shaves $500 off the rate before it ever reaches the client, the sudden sense that the number you calculated is somehow too much to actually claim. None of that is a character flaw. It is a learned risk calculation your brain is running automatically based on real data it collected from the real world. The problem is it was calibrated for an environment that punishes female ambition, and it never updated when you became the person writing your own invoices and setting your own rates. What makes this expensive beyond the obvious is that the guilt doesn't stay in salary negotiations. It spreads into every financial context where money and self-worth occupy the same conversation. Vanessa Patrick at the University of Houston studied the relationship between guilt and consumer behavior and found that people carrying guilt about wanting more are significantly more likely to engage in compensatory spending, small purchases that function as self-permissions, a way of releasing the pressure of the wanting without having to confront it directly. A candle, a jacket, something for the apartment that feels like care rather than consumption. Nothing catastrophic individually, but a woman spending an extra $200 a month on purchases that are really just pressure release valves is spending $2,400 a year on a symptom while the actual condition runs untouched. The guilt about wanting more income at the earning end produces the spending that drains the account at the other end. One installed belief producing two financial wounds simultaneously, and most women only ever notice the spending without connecting it to its source. They audit their subscriptions, they meal prep, they try another budgeting app, and the account still ends up in the same place every month because the actual variable, the thing running underneath it all, never gets named. The guilt also produces avoidance, and the avoidance is where the long-term damage accumulates quietly. Women who feel this specific kind of financial guilt tend to avoid financial conversations entirely, with partners, with employers, with financial advisors, because every one of those conversations eventually requires stating what they want directly, which is exactly the thing the guilt has made feel dangerous. Consider what that avoidance actually costs in practical terms. A woman who avoids negotiating her salary at 28 starts her career on a suppressed base. A woman who avoids the conversation with her financial advisor at 34 keeps $40,000 sitting in a savings account earning 4%, while index funds return 10%. Not because she doesn't know the difference, but because walking into that office means showing someone exactly where she is, which means confronting where she isn't. A woman who avoids the rate increase conversation with her longest client at 38 leaves money on the table every single month for years because that relationship feels too important to risk. None of these avoidances feel like financial decisions in the moment. They feel like social management. They feel like being reasonable. The financial cost only becomes visible when you add it all up, which most women don't do because the addition is too uncomfortable to finish. That avoidance also creates information asymmetry that compounds the problem. Everyone she negotiates against has more information about what she's worth in the market than she has allowed herself to claim out loud. Her employer knows the salary bands, the client knows the market rate, the financial advisor knows what her portfolio should look like at her age. She is walking into every one of these conversations already behind because the guilt made the preparation feel like overreaching. That gap doesn't stay abstract. It shows up in the rate she quotes, the offer she accepts without countering, the review cycle where she waited to be recognized instead of making the case herself, the year she decided it wasn't the right time and then decided the same thing the following year. Run the full math on what that actually costs. A woman who accepts a starting salary of $68,000 when the market rate for her role is $75,000 starts her career $7,000 behind. If she receives standard 3% annual raises on that base, by year 5 she is earning $78,800. Her counterpart, who negotiated the $75,000 starting salary and received the same 3% raises, is earning $86,900 by year 5. That $8,100 annual gap is already larger than the original $7,000 difference because the raises are compounding on different bases. By year 10, the woman who started at $68,000 is earning $91,300. The woman who negotiated is earning $100,700. The gap is now $9,400 per year. By year 20, the woman who started lower is earning $122,700. The woman who negotiated her start is earning $135,100. The annual gap has grown to $12,400 from a single conversation that lasted 15 minutes and happened 2 decades earlier. Now carry that into retirement contributions. If both women contribute 10% of their salary to a 401k throughout their careers, the woman who started at $68,000 is contributing $9,130 per year at year 10. The woman who negotiated is contributing $10,070 per year at year 10. That $940 annual difference in retirement contributions invested at 7% average returns compounds into approximately $48,000 in additional retirement savings over a 30-year career. From the contribution difference alone, the total wealth gap generated by that single unnegotiated starting salary, when you run it honestly through 35 years of raises, bonuses, retirement contributions, and investment returns, lands somewhere between $750,000 and $1.2 million, depending on career trajectory. Linda Babcock's $1 million figure is not an exaggeration. It is a conservative estimate for a median career. The standard fix offered for all of this is to push through the discomfort. Lean in, negotiate anyway. Feel the fear and ask for the number. This advice has been given to women in books, podcasts, and corporate leadership programs for 15 years, and the structural outcome has barely shifted because the advice misidentifies the problem entirely. The discomfort isn't irrational fear to be overcome through mindset work. It is a prediction about real social consequences that the research confirms is accurate. Rudman's backlash effect is not something women imagined. Women who negotiate assertively do face social penalties that men do not face for the same behavior. Telling someone to ignore a real risk doesn't make the risk disappear. It just makes her feel like a personal failure when the courage she worked up didn't produce the outcome she was promised. That failure then becomes additional evidence that asking is dangerous, which tightens the guilt further, which makes the next negotiation even harder than the last one. What Rudman's later research actually identified is that the backlash is significantly reduced in specific structural conditions. When the negotiation is anchored to documented value rather than stated as personal desire, not what she wants, but what the data shows she produced with specific numbers attached, the response from evaluators changes measurably. The brain that penalizes the personal ask responds differently to an accounting. A woman who walks into a salary review and says she believes she deserves more triggers one response. A woman who walks in with a documented record of 3 projects that generated $340,000 in revenue and says the market rate for that output is $92,000 based on 3 comparable salary surveys triggers a different response entirely. Same woman, same ask, different structure. The social penalty that the guilt was trying to protect her from is substantially reduced because the framing removed the personal claim and replaced it with an external accounting. These are not personality changes. They are structural conditions that remove the context in which the backlash is most potent, and they are available to any woman who understands what she is actually navigating rather than assuming the problem is her confidence. Before the next financial conversation where a number needs to come out of your mouth, write down 2 figures first: the number you are planning to say and the number you actually calculated when you did the math honestly. If they're different, the gap between them is not strategy, and it's not humility, and it's not waiting for the right moment. It's a tax you're paying on income you already earned. Name it that. Then find one external data point that supports the higher figure. 1 salary survey, 1 industry benchmark, 1 number from a peer in the same role at a comparable organization. You are not building confidence. You're building an anchor that exists outside your own head, one the guilt has significantly less leverage over than a number you generated alone in a room where the guilt was also present. Most women who feel financially stuck are not stuck because they lack skill, discipline, or financial knowledge. They're stuck because they've been running a systematic discount on their own value for so long that the discounted number feels like the real one. The women who earn with their worth didn't get there by feeling better about themselves. They built structures that don't require the guilt to give permission before income can be claimed. That structure is available. It starts with the gap between the number you calculated and the number you said. If this explains something you have been feeling but couldn't name, subscribe. That is exactly what this channel is built for. And if you want a structured way to work through the specific patterns shaping your financial behavior, the Wealth Psychology Workbook is in the description. That is precisely what it was built for.